particularly I'm going to take today. And I want that we take about 1 hour. I will try to share my experience, and after that we will have some question answer sessions, because all of you are sadhakas yourself. You must have memorized and by hearted Srimad Bhagavad Gita, all the 18 chapters. I am going to particularly focus on the 12th chapter today. Because it is such a vast subject and the best. And as Kavita said, Advaita Amruta Varshini, Bhagavati. So we cannot obviously do any justice or to even think of it, for all the 18 chapters. That will become very general. So I'm going to just focus on the 12th chapter. In general, the 12th chapter is understood as the chapter for bhakti. So I have been trying to study bhakti from the last 15-20 years. And I have tried to read original texts, and also I have tried to read other texts to understand this from a perspective of a psychologist. So today I understand that we have a mixed audience. So I'm going to talk about bhavana particularly, and how this particular bhavana transforms our consciousness in the bhakti traditions of Hinduism. So that is what I am hoping to cover some ground today. So first context is the context of Gita Jayanti, and also my own personal context, that in my family I heard the 12th chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita every day, because my grandmother, who was a very strong karmakandi, she was a Dvaita, she followed Madhvacharya, and her rule for everyone was that after bath, all of us have to do the Patantara of 12th chapter. So just like in Chinmay Mission, we have the 15th chapter before lunch and dinner. The 12th chapter was around the bathing time. So one kept on listening to it automatically. There was no need to memorize it specifically. It just happened. We did not even learn the meaning of it, or the message, or the theoretical understanding. It just kept on going on in our mind. It's only in the last 20 years I wanted to see if we can integrate it in psychology, which I teach. Now, this is the context. Then we will talk about the background notes on consciousness in Indian psychology, some key background points, because if we are not from psychology background, or if we are not from the European American philosophy background, we can mistake several concepts and ideas. So all of us who want to do any kind of integration between Indian knowledge systems and contemporary systems, we have to have some background in both the streams, so that we can do the Setubandha. So we will have a brief understanding of that, not more than 5 to 10 minutes. Then I will talk about Bhava, Rasa and Jnanottara Bhakti. Because as Gauriji would say, or as all of you would know, that Bhakti, Karma and Jnana are understood in 3 cycles in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. The first 6, then the next 6, and the next 6. So you will see that there are certain chapters in Srimad Bhagavad Gita which focus only on bhakti. There are certain chapters which focus primarily on jnana, and certain chapters which primarily focus on karma yoga. Of course, there are some very specific chapters, like the 6th chapter, which focuses on yoga, and some amazing chapters like Vibhuti, the 10th chapter on Vibhutis, which Jnaneshwara, who is a great Natha Yogi saint in Maharashtra, also interpreted as Adbhuta Bhakti, the Vibhuti Yoga that we see in the 10th chapter. So we will see this kind of overlap and an interplay between jnana, karma and bhakti. But then I'm going to talk about 12th chapter, which is basically what I would say as jnanottara bhakti, because it arises after the 11th chapter in the context of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Now, what does it mean for psychology and what does it mean for research in IKS and Indian psychology is what we will spend most time on. I'm expecting about 30 minutes on that. So then, which will bring to 3 models of Indian psychology of emotion that I will try to present to you for your feedback. There are several scholars in this audience who are all my sahodaras and sahodaris, because our mother is the Saraswati herself. And so I would like your opinions on that as well. So I will explain those models, and then we will talk about the possibilities of research and practice in it. Another 5 minutes, not more than that. Okay. Now, the basic background that we need to know, that we in India have inherited. So there is a problem here. So we in India have inherited a legacy of Euro-American philosophy, as well as the problems in the European and American philosophy, what is called as continental philosophy. One of the implications, one of the outcomes of that Euro-American legacy, unfortunately for all humans, is that we have inherited the legacy of a fragmented psyche. How does this look in terms of theory? Let us first look at the theory. What it does is, I have explained the rationale for 12th chapter already. What it does is, contemporary mainstream psychology, at least in the last 70, 80 years, has been struggling with the dualism of body-mind. Very briefly. This comes from a philosopher in Europe called Descartes, and Descartes split body-mind and external, internal, and so on and so forth into very rigid dichotomies. This dualism, for those Indian scholars whom I frequently encounter, is different from Prakriti Purusha. Prakriti Purusha is it's not a dualism, right? In Prakriti, you have the mind body, which is part of the Prakriti, right? The body arises from the Trigunas and Tridoshas, and the mind also arises from the Trigunas. So this cannot be compared to the Cartesian dualism. But there is a Cartesian dualism, at least about till 30 years back. It was very predominant, and the earliest researches in psychology reflect that dualism. Point to note for IKS and Indian scholars, this cannot be compared with Prakriti, because Prakriti has Sattva Guna, and Sattva reflects knowledge. If we have increase in Sattva, we reflect knowledge of the Purusha. So you cannot compare this Jada with the Jada of body-mind in the European continental philosophy. After this, I'm stopping. The Greek philosophy generally has a logic of either or. And a lot of philosophers, from where European philosophy also learns and works, a lot of Indian philosophers in the current times, including a person called Ramprasad, Professor Ramprasad, have written on Indian philosophical frameworks and the Nyaya framework, which don't follow either or, but which have more detailed and nuanced understanding of logic. So the Greek logic is binary. Okay, that's why where you get the phrase horns of a dilemma. Lemma is truth, mathematics, right? So because of that, you see earlier, you would more see the binaries of reason and affect. And so you should note that I'm coming to affect to build my argument here. So reason was all rational and affect was all non-rational. That's how the binary splits into. The mind is split. This does not happen in any of the Indian philosophical ideas and thoughts and any of the Indian applied psychologies, including Buddhism and Jaina thought. In Buddhism and Jaina thought, you know it more than me. Buddhist thought, especially Nagarjuna's Tetralemma, as well as Jaina thought of Anekantavada or Syadvada, which you can disagree from an Advaita perspective or the Hindu Nyaya perspective, but still the clear-cut fragmentation and binary between reason and affect is not there. That is the point to hold. Okay. Now, this creates a big problem in psychology, in contemporary psychology, which you don't see in Indian psychology. What is that? What is the relationship between body and mind? How do you see that? What is the relationship between sports and mental status? Sports is body. What happens to mind then? What is the relationship between meditation and body? There is a problem now, right? So this has been a challenge for contemporary psychology. Similarly, reason and affect. So are emotional thoughts irrational? Are emotions irrational? No, they can be, but they are not always, right? So mindfulness, why is it very popular now? Precisely because it breaks that dichotomy between reason and affect, where mind is a coda or a code term for cognition. Where we have another problem which will come to later. But in general, till the last about 15-20 years and more so now, there is a no self. Self is not agreed to, but there is a trisection, a tripartite split between cognition, which is thinking, which is called as rationality, affect, which is mostly understood as non-rational. That's why they say, and nowadays, even Indians talk mindlessly like that, keep your emotions aside. What nonsense is that? Can anyone keep their emotions aside? How is it possible? So you talk like this in popular terminology, but there is a trisection: cognition, affect, and behavior. Earlier, about 40 years, 50 years back, behavior was the predominant school. But primarily, behavior is measurable and seen in the body. I want all of us to understand this. Now, when we study consciousness, and all of us in India would love to talk about consciousness, but when Advaitins talk about consciousness, they are talking about jnana and anubhuti. Whereas when contemporary psychologists are talking about consciousness, they are talking about consciousness as experienced in the body mind. Okay, so this philosophical distinction needs to be clear. Okay, now one of the key problems of mind-body dualism is that in Euro-American thought, in general, this kind of a binary, it's so sukshma that nobody even bothers about it, is that because consciousness is understood as transcendental, it is not understood as within the body. So I have had students in my own class saying that, what is consciousness got to do with psychology? Right? Consciousness has got nothing to do with psychology. Correct. Is it even possible that way? So you have to think, why is it that the student is saying that? The student is saying that because consciousness is an emergent phenomena from the mind. Whereas when Advaitins look at it, they say mind is or even Sankhyans, they say that the mind is an emergent phenomenon from the consciousness. So you see, it's a Shirshasana and Tadasana happening here. The European context or the Euro-American psychology says that consciousness emerges from the mind. Whereas the Advaitins and the Sankhyans say that the mind emerges from the consciousness. So if you're a mathematician, you would say this is a superset subset relationship that is getting flipped. Ulta. Okay. But one of the big problems which we have not addressed in India, and my recent paper has talked about it, is that because we have this binary between body mind, we also have a binary, by the way, between mind and spirit. In the Abrahamic religions, body, mind, spirit is our trisection, hierarchical trisection. So that which is spiritual is different from the body mind. अब क्या करेंगे? So what happens to Krama and Jivan Mukti? What happens to the Advaita thought? These are very important questions, which I'm not going, because I have to lay this background. So when we understand psychology, Euro-American psychology, and we want to talk about decolonizing Euro-American psychology, the first principle is we must know the Purva Paksha. This is the Purva Paksha. What is that? There are dualisms and trisections. There is no self, and consciousness is emergent upon body processes. So what is the first step? The first step is we have to say, can we experience transcendental consciousness in embodied consciousness? That's the first step. So we have to first prove that consciousness is embodied and transcendental together, logically possible or not. That's how we say Krama Mukti or Jivan Mukti is possible. The moment you say Videha Mukti, finish, it's transcendental, then the binary triggers in and you cannot argue philosophically or psychologically to them at all. Now, what does it mean? What is the implication of that? The implication is that you have topographically flat transformation models. Matlab kya hua? Topographically flat means you don't have three-dimensional models of transformation of consciousness. You have flat models. So cognition can affect emotion flat in a lateral way, not in a vertical way, which is something that I'm going to show you today. Then we cannot connect different states of mind towards well-being. We cannot understand what is well-being properly because we have splintered it. No. So cognitive, what is the relationship between cognitive well-being and affective well-being? What is the relationship between IQ and EQ? Popular words, everybody knows about it, every idiot and Tom, Dick and Harry knows about it, right? What is the relationship between IQ and EQ? Big problem. So there are several other issues now. What is that? This first point I mentioned, mind versus consciousness, and consciousness as emergent. The word that we use in English, that consciousness is a subset of the mind, is emergent. I have read a little bit of Vaisheshika Sutras, and in Vaisheshika Sutras, I find some similarity. The experts here can correct me, but in Vaisheshika Sutras, you see that it appears that way, or maybe it is a wrong interpretation. Some philosophers like Bina Gupta, who's a very famous Advaitin philosopher, have also said that Vaisheshika thought is more of an objectivist thought in terms of, this whole debate about mind versus consciousness. There is a new philosophy which is coming up now in European philosophy, which is called panpsychism. Those who are interested can read it. I'm not going to spend time on that. The additional problem, one problem is popular psychology usage and the use of the English words that completely confuses everyone. Everyone gets confused with these words. For example, the word meditation is a miserable word. And please don't mind my use of the term miserable and other words. I don't mean any harm to anyone. But it is a miserable word because you cannot, there's no clarity in it. Attention in Indian concepts has so many words, like avadhana is one of the words. Then dhyana, then dharana, then so many other words are there for attention. But attention doesn't inform us, at least those who think in Sanskrit or in Indian languages, anything. There's no conceptual clarity, and we use these words like mindlessly, totally. Like, for example, we say, let us become objective, keep your emotions aside. What kind of statement is that? Right? Then, because there is a binary, deep-rooted binary in contemporary psychology, there is a mindless distinction between positive and negative emotion. And everybody talks about it without any thought, like, this is negative, this is positive, this is negative, this is positive. I have written in one of my earlier papers that in Indian context, emotions are not positive and negative because of the way they feel, but because where they lead to. So if the emotion leads you to mukti, then that's a positive emotion. If the depression leads you to sannyasa, then that depression is positive. If that happiness leads you to more potato chips and alcohol, then that is negative happiness. Right? So when there is a mindless distinction between negative and positive emotion, the directionality of that emotion, either towards mukti or towards bandhana, is not seen. Which is what I mean by topographically three-dimensional models. Does the emotion lead you to mukti? Then according to Indian thought, it's a positive emotion, even though it feels bad for some time. If the emotion is feeling good for some time but leads you to bandhana, then that emotion is a negative emotion. Like, for example, stuti, praise, feels wonderful, but it leads you to bandhana, negative emotion. Correct? That clarity is not used by many of the psychologists in India at all, because they follow the European and American psychology mindlessly. There's nothing wrong in European and American psychology. In fact, any seeker from any part of the world is a seeker first. It is the non-seekers who get confounded or become mindless in that moment of tamas. So this is not really about European and Indian. It is really about the problems from that legacy. Okay. Now, different ideas of self and no self, we will not go into that. The new words, if you want to translate some words, then one of the most important things is how careful you are while you are translating in English. Because this is a decolonized global world, we need to translate. I agree. But when we want to translate, when you're reading Indological scholarship, when you want to translate, you have to be extremely careful what you're translating it into. Some of the words that I particularly appreciate is this term called ownerless consciousness, which is nirahankara chaitanya. Why and this has been coined by a very good contemporary philosopher called Professor Chakravarti Ramprasad from UK. And he's an Advaitin, as I mentioned. He particularly used this word because ownerless consciousness takes care of the Buddhist idea of no self and the Advaitin idea of self, the transcendental self, not the word transcendental, but the real self. Another word that has been used nowadays, recent in the last 4 or 5 papers, is the word used by Josipovich, who's a Buddhist practitioner, called non-representational reflexivity. Which means that there is nothing in the reflexivity that there is no druk, there is no drushya. There is no drushya. That's what I will say, not druk. Very careful requirement to translate. There is a lot of interest now on non-dual awareness, and Indian scholars need to really write before it completely gets out of our hand. Especially Josipovich has been writing on non-dual awareness. You can type in Google Scholar and find several of his papers. The new words influenced by Buddhism, which have been used now are enactivism. The word enactivism is used to address the mind-body dualism, which means thinking while being active or thinking while being in the body. Another one that is used directly, you can see embodied cognition, because they would think cognition is different from the body. Quite strange, but yes. And non-dual awareness, and what are the words that we can think about it. With this background, I will now focus on this particular topic. So overall, one comment, because of this focus on cognition and this kind of a very subtle binary between reason and affect, there is more focus on cognitive processes and less focus on affect. Affect, by affect I mean emotion or bhavana, which I'm coming to. There is more focus on cognitive processes and less focus on affective processes, because affective processes were deemed to be irrational. And that is where Indian psychological thought can literally give prakash, anjan, in the eyes of all of us. And you will see that there are more than 300 studies on yoga and meditation, but very few studies focus on affect. Why? Because they are focusing on behavior and they are focusing on thinking. Why? Because that's exactly what is more focused in the European context. So we need to do the change. We need to flip it. In the Indian context, there is an aikya of the self system, and the self system is based on this ahamkara, ahambhava, which we will discuss now. And this ahamkara and ahambhava will lead to the practice or the sadhana, which will lead to the transformation of consciousness over a period of time from bandhana to mukti. So that topographical model is also inbuilt in this aikya. Now, the students of history, of Indian history or history of Indian philosophical thought should know that this integration of yoga, Advaita and Sri Vidya is seen in Acharya Shankara's work, but becomes very, very explicit from the 10th century onwards in writings. So you cannot say that it is not written and it's only in the oral tradition. It is seen in the written traditions as well. So you see that oneness, that aikya in Acharya's writings, but it is not explicitly said, because obviously at that point of time these terrible binaries were not so explicit. But you see that consolidation in Yoga Advaita, Sri Vidya, Trika Shaiva systems and Sankhya, Yoga Sankhya, Advaita and Trika Shaiva. And you can do a detailed research on it. We will not do it here. For our purpose, we are saying what are the models available in Indian psychology for affective transformation. Note that when I say affective transformation, I am saying affect is a trigger, but there is an aikya of transformation and everything gets transformed. I am not saying that affective transformation leads to affective well-being or EQ. Lot of Indian corporates and all that just get stuck in that, right? I'm not saying that. I'm saying affective transformation triggers self-transformation, and what are those models? And finally, I'm also saying this, that bhakti is that moment of Indian modernity of all the Indic values of oneness, love and fellowship, and India became a bhakti civilization right from 10th century onwards. And this process of bhakti took 300 years. So we cannot expect a renaissance in 30 years or 40 years. if we want the deepest and the most profound transformation in the Indian context of Indian civilizational context, then it must be for 400, 500 years, which is where the role of universities which focus on Adhyatma or the Indic ideas of Adhyatma is important. Okay, so Indian psychology is that applied psychology based on that Aikya, integrated consciousness psychology, and it is a psychology that moves from bandhana to well-being through topographically three-dimensional models, not flat models. Now, very clear, you all know about this because you're from CVV and you must have read it. If you have not, you should. There are several keyword concepts for consciousness important for their pravrutti nimitta, like Nija, Vastu, Atman, etc. In the context of Indian psychology, Manas is primarily, I am taking it as a sensory motor coordinating mechanism. And this is for technical stuff, that for us to write papers, peer-reviewed papers. The first mention of Manas I have seen in the 10th mandala of Rigveda, the 10th Rucha, where it is used in the sense of Manyate. Now, Manas as a sensory motor coordination. A lot of people say, where is Manas? Manas is a sensory motor coordinating mechanism. There is no entity. It is a mechanism. And this Manas, because it is a sensory motor coordinating mechanism, it embodies. What do you mean by that? It is related to the body. So a lot of Indological scholarship keeps talking body awareness, body consciousness, body awareness, body. It Manas embodies what Chitta shows. Chitta shows continuity of consciousness. 5 minutes back. Now I'm talking only about embodied consciousness because, as I explained, I'm going to first limit my discussion to embodied consciousness because of this binary between transcendental and embodied in the European thought. So Chitta shows the continuity of embodied consciousness, which means 5 minutes back I was something, 5 minutes later I am something else. Am I completely different people? So Chitta alone shows that continuity of consciousness. And the psychological concept in Chitta, apart from Karma Samskara Vasana that you read in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, is memory, smruti. Okay? Manas shows Shruti and Smriti together, but it is in the body, embodied form. Chitta shows continuity. And by continuity, we mean memory, because memory continues. And Ahamkara shows individuation. And that is the reason why Ram Prasad's word, ownerless consciousness, is Nirahankara Chaitanya or Jnana. Okay. Now we see Antakarana. It's a very pervasive Indian word concept. It doesn't show an entity. It shows the mechanism. Bahishkarana, Antakarana, I think. So Chitta, Buddhi, Manas and Ahamkara. Buddhi is a deciding cognitive faculty. So Manas is sensory motor. Buddhi is decision making and cognition. Chitta is memory and continuity, and Ahamkara is individuation. Now you will say, where is emotion? And that's why emotion is not seen. So emotion, as I have written in my earlier papers, is direct and affect. So when I'm using the word affect, I'm using affect in a broad sense of emotion, feelings, and sentiment, but mostly affect and emotion. Okay? Emotion is inherent in the word for consciousness, which is Satchidananda. Ananda is that term for affective processes, and therefore, when we say Jivatman, what we mean is the transformation of Ahamkara through emotion transforms that knowledge. which means that emotion is a trigger process, nimitta, and the sadhana for transforming your ahamkara. And when the ahamkara gets transformed, then you arrive at jnana. And from jnana, what happens to you after that? So in bhakti, you come back for jnanottara bhakti, which is what Srimad Bhagavad Gita talks in the 12th chapter, which means where Sri Krishna says that I like the jnani bhakta the best. Which means that after the experience of jnana, tattva jnana, the person comes back to the embodied consciousness. So I'm remaining in the embodied consciousness for now. Okay? Which brings us to bhakti. Now, bhakti is found in Shvetashvatara Upanishad specifically. And you must have read a lot about bhakti in terms of saguna upasana and nirguna upasana and so on and so forth, right? I will not get into that. I am trying to connect it from a psychological point of view alone. I have identified 4 mechanisms and I am now zooming in on ahamkara. And I am saying it is the concept of ahamkara which triggers these transformations from baddha to mukta, right? And this is exactly what I'm translating from the texts, but I'm making it into English for psychological models. So we see bhakti in Shvetashvatara Upanishad, the word bhava, which talks about affective process, is found across Vedantic concepts, corpus. It is found in PYS, which is Patanjali Yoga Sutra. It is found in Natya Shastra. It is found in Bhakti texts. It is found in Purva Vimamsa texts. If you read Bhatta Kumarila's Purva Vimamsa text, it talks about bhavanam, which is why you do an action. In that context, it is used as an emotion that triggers action, that triggers a dharmic action, vidhi yukta. Then the word bhava is also found in Trikashaiva texts. Bhava is therefore more than emotion, but it certainly has an affective root to it, and therefore bhava is the closest word that you will get to affect and emotion in the Indian context of aikya. Note that we are not trisecting, so we cannot have that kind of a compartmentalization. Now, bhava and rasa are closely connected, and rasa is across Vedic corpus. It is used in the sense of a fluid. And in Paniniya Dhatupatha also, the word rasa is used in the sense of a fluid. Specifically, you will find the word rasa in Taittiriya, where there is a great Shruti, Raso Vaisaha, which connects to Ananda. If you read Acharya Shankara's interpretation, Bhashya, as well as because Taittiriya is Ananda Mimamsa and it is found in the second Vali. So Rasa and Bhava are connected to Ananda, Ananda as well as to the Ahamkara or the person, Atman, the Jiva Atman. So the point is this, that the transformation of consciousness can only be done through transformation of affect, because transformation of affect transforms your ahamkara. Otherwise, what happens? You have a lot of Shabda Panditya, you have a lot of cognition here and there and everywhere else, but emotion has not transformed. And therefore, you see a lot of scholarship, but no transformation. And so institutions like CVV have to focus on this scholarship of affective transformation. So there is a discussion in the Indian thought on Chid Ghana and Chid Rasa. Ghana means solidity, right? So Chid Ghana, this body or this mind, whether you are in a Baddha state or in a Jivan Mukta state, or Chidrasa. This is totally connected to the idea of body itself in the Indian context. We have so many words: Kaya, Kalevara, Tanu, Sharira, Vapu, Vigraha, Deha. In Ayurveda, Deha, Deha, Prakriti. So all of these have a different Pravritti Nimitta, and different models can be constructed if you're looking at embodied consciousness as well. But we are not going there now. What we are saying is transformation of affect results in transformation of ahamkara from a baddha, ragadvesha, abhinivesha based ahamkara and asmita to shuddha aham bhava. And that shuddha aham bhava is part of that krama mukti, and as well as jivana mukti and jnanottara bhakti, because the jnanottara bhakti implies that the person comes back to the same identity. The jnanottara bhakti implies that the person takes the same body mind, and the jnanottara bhakti means that this person, Sri Swami Shivananda Maharaj or Thakur Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or great Swami Sri Vivekananda Maharaj, or so many of Sri Ramana Maharshi, they agreed to be called as Sri Ramana in the same body mind, which means that they agree to that ahamkara with that shuddha aham bhava alone. So there are three models which I'm going to talk about very fast. And I will request Kavita to tell me 15 minutes or 10 minutes before the time I overshoot the time. I will then wrap it up. So there are three models which we will talk about. And I'm taking this as from a pure Advaitin perspective, that we are not finding anything new. We are just recognizing ourselves, which we had forgotten. So much of tamas that we had forgotten, and so much of Leela, Bhagavati's Leela herself. So the first model, very briefly, this one I will not take more than 3-4 minutes. It's the Ayurvedic model. There are two papers that I have shared, which can be shared with the students if they want to study it more. In Ayurveda, we see a model of affective transformation, but their strategy is completely different because it is focused on the body. Great. I mean, body, mind, but more on the body and from body to mind. So the topographical movement or the direction, the disha, is from the body to the mind. And so you see this concept of Sharirika and Manasika Vega. So what is the logic here? When I have spoken with a few, and this can be seen in the two papers that I have already shared, the Vaidyas say that we have what is called as Sharirika Vega and Manasika Vega in Ayurveda. What are these Sharirika Vega? Burping, for example, passing gas, evacuation, urination, all these are Sharirika Vegas. This word is closest to what you see in psychology as called as drive. Involuntary movements of the body. Okay. Now, bhuk or usko kya bolte kshudha, pipasa are also body drives. But kshudha and pipasa are associated with body mind as well. How? You can do fasting. You must have done fasting today. When we have Nirjala Ekadashi, we fast for water as well, right? So it is associated with the Jivatman, but it is also under some voluntary control. So Sharirika Vega actually has two categories. One is these Sharirika Vegas, like going to the bathroom, urination and evacuation, or burping, or all those things. But there is a category of Sharirika Vega which can be controlled by them, or which is under some voluntary control, which is Kshudha as well as Pipasa. But the Vaidyas in Ayurveda, say that you should not try to control Sharirika Vega. For example, if you have to go for number 2, you should go for number 2. If you have to burp, you should burp, right? Then they talk about the second aspect, very important one, is Manasika Vega. So in Manasika Vega, you have the desires, which are loosely, uselessly translated as desires, which basically you mean bodily desires like sex, or sleep. Now, there is a possibility to put a combined form here between Sharirika and Manasika, which is those drives of the body which are amenable to some mental control, which includes Kshuddha, Pipasa, Maithuna, Nidra. So you must have heard of a very famous shlok, Ahara Nidra Bhayamaithunancha. So what does the shloka karta say? Dharmo hi eko. Right? So it is dharma alone which allows you to regulate bhuk, which is ahara, whatever you want to eat, etc., etc. Kshuddha, Pipasa, as well as Bhaya. Bhaya is related to all the survival motives which are connected to the Jivatman, whoever that Jivatman is, whether it's a Pakshi, Pashu, Kitaka, human being, and so on. So, broadly, Sharirika Manasika Vega, Ayurveda says Manasika Vega has to be regulated. Whereas Sharirika Vega shouldn't be regulated. And as I have written in one of my papers, we do the opposite in the current context. We don't regulate our Manasika Vega. There are people who will say, I'll have multiple partners in my life, sexual partners for both men and women. But I will totally control my food because I want to be fit. Or I will starve myself because I want a zero, what is it called? Zero size. So I will control my Sharirika Vega, but I will not control my Manasika Vega. It's the opposite. Whereas Dharma, if somebody wants to make a model on this, they can work with young people and with Ayurvedic Vaidyas, and they can come at a model of Indian psychology, which is body-mind specifically in health. Anyway, when we come to Manasika Vega, then we have a model here of the 6 Manasika Vegas that need to be regulated. What are they? Kama, Krodha, Mada, Moha, Lobha, Ahamkara. Matsara also some people talk. Now, in the Ayurvedic model, you look at Manasika and Sharirika Vega through some kind of a control, which is food, diet, lifestyle, behaviors, and Shamana. So Shamana, to do Shamana of the body-centered consciousness. So this is one model where you are trying to bring the involuntary affective processes to voluntary regulatory control. So food, thirst, sex, sleep, and what else? Fear. 5 basic, almost involuntary, drive-like affective processes, of which fear is clearly identified as emotion here, but are related to body, mind, sensory motor coordination, and Ayurveda and Pratyahara you'll find several models here. One of the things is pranayam, which I'm not going into detail. Pranayam is body mind, and therefore, because pranayam is body mind, it is also connected to manas. You will have several such statements, primary sources, texts which say that when you control pran, you control manas. Now, according to Ayurveda, what is the outcome? Prasannendriya manaswasthya. Prasannatma, prasannendriya, indriya. What is Indriya? You know it more than I do. Indriya is sensory, motor, both Karma Indriya and Jnanendriya. And that's why when you see the Prakriti Purusha chart, you see Jnanendriya and Karmendriya and Manas. There in that Prakriti Purusha chart, you see that. So the broad modeling that we can do from here is from the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Hatha Yoga texts and variables. I'm going to come to variables in the last 5 minutes. But holding on to these Shadripus, Kama, Krodha, Mada, Moha, Lobha, Ahamkar, I want you to hold on to this point. Okay, these are clearly identified as negative emotions even by corporate teachers, isn't it? Now, Kama, Krodha, Mada, Moha, Lobha, Matsara, Ahamkara are definitely affective processes related to the Jivatman, or in Yoga Sutras related to the Pratiprasava Sukta, which is Avidya, Smita, Raga, Dvesha, Vinivesha. Now, here comes the concept which is building my argument of a second model. A second model is more emotional. Remember, more emotional in an European sense. The first model was from body to mind and from involuntary emotions to voluntary emotions, or voluntary control over certain emotions. Now we are coming to pure Raj Yoga context.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please.
I think now third slide is visible for us. So
it's not visible, is it?
No, the third slide is visible. So I think.
Oh, I see. So you have, oh my God. So you have not seen any of those. Oh, you should have told me before then. So that slide has not moved while in my laptop, the slide was moving. So I'm very sorry about that. I don't know. There's a laptop issue maybe. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, now the fourth slide is visible.
Are, you should have told me this before. Anyway, I have shared the slides with you, but I was on this point, Raj Yoga model. Before that, I did mention, can you see the Ayurvedic model now here?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, so I think on a slide share mode, it is not moving, but so I will go on this itself, although I think it will compromise the quality of that reading some bit. But right now I am on the Raj Yoga model. And can you see the Raj Yoga model now?
Yes.
Can you read it?
Yes.
I will make it a bit more. No, I can't do that. So Raj Yoga model, you see one sukta. Now I want you to think clearly. The first model was body centered but moving to mind, which is Ayurveda. The second model is purely what is called as mind. Now mind is not comparable to manas, okay, but mind. Here we see body, senses and mind. The focus is more on Chitta Shuddhi. And Chitta Shuddhi, I talked about Chitta as more related to Karma Samskara, Vasanas and memory, because it gives continuity, Smriti, you know. Now, here we see this shloka, which again is body-mind related, which is Vairagya. Now, Vairagya, we have made a big ha, hoo out of it, so that everybody runs away from Vairagya. You know, everybody starts, if you talk to a young person now, कि वैराग्य रखना चाहिए, तो देर से नहीं हमें कोई संन्यास नहीं लेना है, हम तो भैया ऐसे ही ठीक है, हम पोटैटो चिप्स खाएंगे, पानी पूरी खाएंगे और हम जो करना है करेंगे, वैराग्य नहीं करेंगे. Very wrong. If you look at the definition of Vairagya, what is the definition in the Sukta? Drushta, Anushravika, Vashikara, Sangya. Correct? What is Drushta? Seeing, senses. Anushravika, heard. And after that, Anu is to follow. Vashikara means regulation. Sangya, knowing. Briefly knowing. There are several words for knowing in the Pali as well as Sanskrit word. Sangya, Prajna, Sangyana, Vijnana, etc., etc. But for now, let us just focus on this model. So first point, de-esotericize. So there is a spelling mistake here. De-esotericize. So you have made it as a very esoteric concept so that it becomes so philosophical that you cannot apply it now. But if you go by the words, you can. Can you do that? So how do we see it in terms of research? First, senses and their acuity. Can you see? Can you hear? So, Drushta Anushravika is sensory motor perception. So, in an Indian psychology, sensory motor perception can be tested now very acutely. And the acuity of that sensory motor perception. What do I mean by that? The quality of the sound. For example, if there are music teachers or music acharyas here, you will know, can you spot the difference between re and ga, or ga and ma, or ma or pa, or shuddha madhyam in Yamuna Kalyani? No, sorry, tivra madhyam in Yaman, and shuddha madhyam in Shuddha Saran. Can you do that? That is how bhakti, we will talk about bhakti and music, that sensory acuity or between music teachers and non-musicians, or yogis and musicians and non-musicians can be done. That's a great model to test. It's a testable proposition. Second, attention, which is where sangya, the word sangya comes in. Sangya comes from the word attention, which means to know. Now, attention is a set of processes, and a lot of researchers are now doing on visual attention. And how do they study visual attention? Through eye tracking. And you will notice that in the Indian context, we study eye tracking while the eyes are closed, because we say that the eye goes where the prana is, right? So visual attention can be studied. Auditory attention, I gave the example of music, can be studied. Conscious and non-conscious processes can be studied. Third, in Vairagya, there's a lot of now research done on imagery. So now when I say Devi Saraswati and you close your eyes, what imagery comes in front of your mind? A veena, a pustaka, a japamala, a lady, a teacher, a mother, a river, right? So a lot of imagery can arise, and this imagery is the latest area of research where we can do research on imagery and Vairagya, which means that if I am showing violent images, does it affect my behavior? If you want to do a research on this, if you are doing violent games like PUBG, I think a lot of students play PUBG games. I don't know whether there is violence in there, but violent games. And does it affect your imagery, and does it affect your processing? Does it affect your decision making, and so on? Advertising also uses imagery, but they use it for their profit. In Indian concepts, we are using imagery for Vairagya. Then the third way in which Vairagya works is symbolization and words. So Vairagya is different from Raga Dvesha, right? So this is something that we use in Indian music. Raga, Rag, Yaman Rag hai, Dhanashri hai, Puriya Dhanashri, and so on and so on. Now all this is a testable proposition. All of these are retrained among the sadhakas in their brain. And therefore, when you test their brains, you should be able to find out some different results from non-sadhaka brains, because these are part of your embodied consciousness. Now, third model. The third model is specifically about specific emotions, which are positive emotions in the European context. So I mentioned that bhakti is found in, referenced in Upanishads. Bhakti is referenced in Srimad Bhagavad Gita as well. And bhava and rasa are more focused in Natya Shastra. And you all must have read about Abhinav Gupta Acharya's description and his contribution of the Shanta Rasa. The word bhakti as a rasa. So bhakti as a yoga is in 12th chapter. Bhakti yoga. Bhakti as a rasa was mentioned in 11th century Marathi scholar was Sri Gopadeva, where he referenced bhakti rasa among sadhakas. Now, bhakti rasa and bhavanam, I mentioned, is found in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra as well. So, in the first model, the first two models, I have looked at Yoga Sankhya. Now, I am moving to Natya Shastra and the Bhakti traditions.
Last 15 minutes, sorry, last.
Yeah. I'm concluding with these two slides. Thank you for reminding. So we see bhavanam in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, tajjapas tadartha bhavanam, samadhi bhavanartha klesha tanukaranarthascha, vitarka badhane pratipaksha bhavanam, and so on and so forth. So bhavanam is a wider word. Bhava has definitely an emotional, affective connotation to it. So you see that in Vishishta Advaita, as well as in the Bhakti traditions of Shuddha Advaita, Vallabhacharya, Surdas, and in the Achintya Bheda Bheda traditions of Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, whom I have referred to, you see that bhakti and emotional transformation is now very, very specific. So Ayurveda talked about body and involuntary emotions. Raj Yoga talked about more cognitive, emotional kind of a thing, kind of a nexus, where Bhavana is talking about pure emotional transformation. Pure emotional transformation. So the word bhava is used in pure emotional transformation sense. And you must have done in Natya Shastra, you see sthai bhava as well as rasa. You see sthai bhava, vyabhichari bhava, vibhava, anubhava, etc., etc. Now, the Shanta, Acharya Abhinav Gupta Acharya Bhagavad Pad contributed the Shanta Rasa. And he said that Shanta Rasa is the most important rasa. And that is the conceptual milestone. Why? Because Parabhakti or the Jnanottara Bhakti that we talk about in the 12th chapter is based on this Shanta Rasa. And this Shanta of the Rasa arises in the 10th and the 11th chapter from the experience of Arjuna. In the 10th chapter, we see Adbhuta. Right? In the 11th chapter, when we see Vishwarupa, we find Bhaya as well, a little bit of Bhaya, but we find Shanta. And this Shanta, which starts from 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, then lays down the base for Jnanottara Bhakti in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Now, Rupa Goswami was a great Gaudiya Vaishnava philosopher and the disciple of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He wrote a very big text called Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And in that, he has given these two definitions. Bhava is defined as an intentional and a focused state of contemplation, which means bhava is a samskara. And therefore is part of chitta, is part of manas, and is part of buddhi. So bhava is an intentional, focused state of contemplation and relationship towards the divine principle. Saguna bhakti. Okay, this could be forms of saints, gods, Vishnu. He's clearly saying it's intentional, which means you are choosing and you are selecting that rupa, that quality, that guna. Okay, it is part of the samskara. So we see that it is part of the Antahkarana Chatushtaya. What is rasa then? Rasa is an experience beyond contemplation, which means rasa is not intentional, rasa cannot be created, and rasa cannot be fabricated. Rasa arises out of bhava. Okay, now rasa is an experience of what some people have called, some great masters have called uh, uh, spuratta or spurti. So rasa arises in you without fabrication, without it arises in you as grace. So we come to Jnanottara Bhakti, which is the 12th chapter, which is completely based on Bhava Samadhi. So you have a word called Bhava Samadhi, which means you cultivate the Bhava, Pratyaya Ekatanata, Dharana Dhyana, Pratyaya Ekatanata. You cultivate the Bhava, and then when you merge into Samadhi, that is the Jnanottara Bhakti. Now, this jnana must arise from Vivek and Vairagya. So this is the 3-step topographical model that I have been talking about. First is Ayurveda, where you can change your body mind, move from body to mind. Then you have more or less cognitive mind behavior, Raj Yoga. And third is Bhakti, which is Jnanottara. This jnana must arise from Vairagya and Viveka. Otherwise, the Gauna Bhakti is only to ask to treat God as your ATM. If you want to have potato chips also, you want to ask God for potato chips. If your karma has caused you to have cancer also, you must ask God for, bypass the law of karma, whereas no God or Saguna Rupa has bypassed the law of karma. So this Jnanottara Bhakti arises from Vairagya and Viveka, and the role of Vairagya is central to change the affect. Kama, Krodha, Mada, Moha, Lobha, Matsara, Hamkara. With this now, what happens to the bhakta like Sri Eknath Maharaj or Tukaram Maharaj or Jnaneshwar or Suradasa or Chaitanya Mahaprabhu or Meera? Can you play a lifelong bhava? Lifelong bhava. So Meera says that she has a lifelong relationship which she chose of Sri Krishna as her Priyakara. So fully and intentionally, this is a great idea that we see in the Indian Bhakti traditions. Intentional role playing. So you intentionally take a role. Now our roles are based on our karma runanu bandhanas, no? So we are a mother to someone or a father to someone or a teacher to someone or whatever it is because of our bandhana. Here this bandhana, this relationship, this bhava is intentionally chosen for mukti, right? So intentional role playing in relationships which are lifelong. So you cannot say one day I'll be in a relationship of vatsalya and the next day I will not have that relationship. That will come if you don't have any vairagya, if you can, if there is no dharma between your sharirika and a manasika vegas, then this problem can happen. And this distinction of Jnanottara Bhakti is the reason why we see a lot of problematic issues, in relationship with fake gurus and abuses that we hear, because this is not Jnanottara Bhakti. When there is Jnanottara Bhakti, because already Vairagya, Viveka, Shamana and Shanti has happened, there should not be any problem like that at all, right? So cognitive and behavioral processes are subservient, mind you. So we have flipped that cognition first and affect later. Now affect is first, Vairagya is first, and then alone thinking is there. And therefore, affective transformation is supreme. Why is this important? Because this affective transformation changes all your relationships. So you see in the 12th chapter, Adveshta Sarvabhutana, Maitra Karuna Evacha. So all of these are social psychological variables, relationship variables. Maitraha, Karunaha, Adveshta. Dvesha will happen if you don't have Vairagya. amaitri, if there is some word called, if maitri will not happen if you don't have vairagya. Dushta, dushtapada, and somebody will become a dushta if there is no vairagya and there is no viveka. So all the 12 all the shlokas that you see in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita are talking about cognitive and behavioral processes after Atma Jnana. And therefore, if we want to do, and this is that topographical model of a sadhaka for a krama mukti, and therefore, if you want to study gurus or teachers or sadhakas, you have to see whether tattva jnana has happened or not. Otherwise, you cannot mix and match pre-tattva jnana, and this is very bad words, but in English, I don't know what else to use. Pre-tattva jnana and post-tattva jnana bhaktas. Pre-tattva jnana bhaktas are sadhakas. They really don't, and in the middle is Advaita, between the bhakta and the Saguna Brahma. In the middle is the Advaita between the bhakta and the Saguna Brahma. That is jnana, right? So bhavana then for the Jivan Mukta Bhaktas or for the masters, Jnanottara Bhakti then becomes a completely intentional, Lokasangraha oriented samskara for not for self as well as for others. And therefore it transforms society. So when we started by saying that bhakti was the moment of Indian modernity, it took 300 years. Generation after generation of bhaktas transformed their relationships with their wives and their husbands, their children, their friends, their shishyas, their teachers, everywhere. And in that context, you will see that they transformed the society. They spiritualize the society. So that spirituality of bhakti is completely embodied. It is not the anubhava jnana, tattva jnana is transcendental, agreed, but bhakti is embodied. Right? So now what are those social behavior indicators? I'm going to look at those 4 here. I want you to skip the first and the second points. I want you to see the 3rd, 4th, and 5th points. So for Jnanottara Bhakti, you will have mantra japa, nama, yantra, mudra, hatha yoga practices, which are related to your body mind, centered on the body, hatha yoga practices. Schema and memory. I mentioned my samskara. You all have a samskara of reciting the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita before dinner and skipping it also sometimes, right? That's a samskara. It will come to you automatically. So schema is the word that we use for automatic samskara. A good automatic samskara will trigger itself without your effort at the right time. That is something that we can study in the sadhakas, especially in the Chinmaya family, because we have a history of reciting Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Then the 3rd thing, I talked about imagery, and I'm closing in another 2 minutes. I talked about imagery. Imagery is being researched in terms of Manasa Puja, Saguna Brahma Manasa Puja, as well as Nirguna Brahma Manasa Puja in terms of light. Jyotish, Jyotish Swarupa. So working memory is a pakka European concept, okay? But one of the philosophers has mentioned that a Pali Theravadin Buddhist mentioned working memory in one of his texts called Vishuddhi Magga. So Vishuddhi or Chitta Shuddhi has been used both by Buddhists as well as by Advaitins and other Bhakti traditions, Vishishta Advaitins, Shuddha Advaitins, Achintya Bheda, Bhakti Parampara, etc. So you can then do research on auditory and visual attention and shared attention. In music, it is so easy to do this because your teacher is telling you "Sa lagao," aapka lag nahi raha hai. है ना? Your teacher is saying, ये क्या गा रहे हो तुम? You know, not a single note is on note. Very Shruti. What is Shruti in your mind? It is your auditory imagery. How do you say that all the suras align themselves with Sa when you cannot hear Sa? Even normal non-musical, by which I mean non-musical students, can understand that this is out of tune when they are not really listening to that tune at that point of time. It is your working memory of that tune, right? So this study has been done, and the brain now is looked at as a biosocial sponge. The brain is like a sponge. It just absorbs what the samskaras are given to it. Okay, and a lot of very interesting research now, and I have sent you 8 papers on this. Not just in India, across Asia. Japan is doing a lot of research. China is doing on this biosocial sponge, where all the samskaras which are based in your culture are shared in your brain and become part of your thinking, feeling, etc. And one person called Bharucha, Professor Jamshed Bharucha, has particularly worked on music. And music, by the way, takes you to transcendence, right? Brahmananda, Rasananda, Brahmananda Sahodara. Acharya Abhinav Gupta called Rasa as Brahmananda Sahodara. Music starts with the body, ears, right? And takes you to the Rasa. Right? So this Professor Bharucha has not done a lot of work on Indian music or Adhyatma, but he has done a lot of research from sensory, motor, cognitive perspectives. You can read about it. Finally, all the Adhyatmic actions that we are taught as sadhakas, puja, actual puja, Parthiv puja, as well as Manasa puja, Shodashopchar, Parthiv Puja and Shodashopchar Manasa Puja. Music, dance, mandala organization in the temples, architecture, which is what I mean, and the social relationships through the bhavana are all made into, are all transformed into Adhyatma, and therefore Bhakti is iti. Not neti. Neti is vairagya. Bhakti is iti. Right? With this, I'm going to stop now. We can do a lot of very interesting research. Recently, I found that now we can have wearable EEG sets, which is my latest discovery. If we have wearable EEG sets, we can take those wearables to our yogis and sadhakas and music teachers and architects and sthapatya experts, instead of bringing them to the labs, and we can do a lot of neuroscience based research. I prefer neuroscience and qualitative based research rather than testing. Let me tell you my bias. But how do we build models? We take a single concept like bhava, and we look at laterally, because we want to see the aikya of that concept across the traditions and darshana systems, and we want to see the changes and the different ways the pravritti nimitta happens, right? And then we want to make 3 or 4 or 5 different models out of it, for which we need competence in and familiarity in philosophy and in technology. Why should we want to do this? We can create there are a lot of very interesting startup ideas that can be done using these variables for assessing the sadhaka's competence as well. So with this, I'm stopping. I hope I'm in time. I don't want to be out of time. So we can have a discussion now. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I overshot by 10 minutes.
No problem, ma'am. My gratitude to you for this interesting information. And also, we must have some questions now in our mind, because as you have covered so many things, Vairagya, Vikaras, and other things. So, like you have mentioned about the Vairagya, and also you have told about the if the depression leads you to the sannyasa, then it is
Hmm.
positive depression. So is there
Yeah.
any connection between pessimism and vairagya? Because in pessimism also people go to the they don't have any hope from the sansara and all.
Yeah.
And vairagya is also something like that, viraga, no raga.
Yeah. So what happens is that pessimism is a Western concept. So I don't know what it means in Sanskrit or Hindi. But if you have a negative outlook about samsara, then in the Indian context, if you're able to be functional, now what happens in clinical depression? This is not to say that depression doesn't exist. What happens in depression is that you are stuck there. Really, depression is baddha. What happens in depression is you really are stuck there with that thought that doesn't allow you to move towards well-being. For example, you use anger to hurt others, or you use sadness to remain sad. So you are not moving towards well-being in a clinical depression. Mind it. If you are using your emotions to hurt yourself or to hurt others, you are in deepest tamas. What happens if you have no expectation? I don't know what is so Vishad, by the way. Yes, Sundarji has written so well. Vishad yoga. The word yoga with Vishada is very important. So if that Vishada leads you to your friend who is Sri Krishna, and you have a conversation with that friend and you resolve your doubts, then that Vishada is yoga. If you are angry and you are sad and you use that anger and sadness and hurt others, harm others, even if you want to make your political points, then that is not yoga. That is not yoga. If you use your negative feelings and hurt feelings, whatever that means, and minimize damage while making your points, then that is yoga. Very tough. That's why ahimsa is a Mahavrata. So I don't know about pessimism, but if you are feeling sad, I'm talking about feeling. If you're feeling sad and that sadness leads you to look for teachers, that sadness leads you to try and solve your problem, then that sadness is a good sadness. Okay? I don't know about pessimism and all. I don't know what is that. Okay. Any other question?
Good evening, ma'am. Vinay here.
Yes, Vinay. Please ask.
Are the contemporary emotions pure? Is there a pure emotion?
There is a pure emotion, and that pure emotion, the closest we can come to pure emotion, the closest, because emotion implies that one of the questions in IKSS is in there must be some object, internal object, a Saguna Brahman, or an external person. So the purest emotion is Shantarasa. In fact, Shantarasa is Chamatkara, because emotions change, but Shantarasa doesn't change. So Shanta is quietness of emotions. It is a Chamatkara according to Acharya Abhinav Gupta Bhagavad Pada. So Shantarasa is the closest to emotion in the meditative context. Right? In the bhakti context, Shrungara is, according to Rupa Goswami, Shrungara is the best emotion because it is the maddest emotion, mad in a good sense. Maddest emotion, you go crazy for the Lord. So that is the purest in the bhakti context.
How about bhavana, ma'am?
जी कौन सा क्या sorry?
How about bhavana?
So bhavana, bhava in the context of Natya Shastra shows emotion. Bhavana in the context of Aikya Bhavana is a combination of emotion, thinking, feeling, and memory, chitta. So if you have a Jiva Bhavana, then life is Dukkha. And if you have a Shiva Bhavana or Soham Bhavana, then your life is not such a bad situation, right? But Bhavana is part of that Aikya of Mana, Buddhi, Chitta and Ahamkara. You can choose that Bhavana. You can choose that Bhavana. Yes. Anyone else?
Yes, one more question.
Shall I remind one thing that I think you said
Yeah.
that you have another meeting at 6 o'clock. So is it okay that if you go for other questions? I am perfectly okay with that. But if you have,
I'll take one more question and then I'll close. I have a meeting at 6 o'clock. Yeah.
This is from Anuradha KG. I will read it out. Could you please share on role of institution and dreams in well-being as per Indian thought?
Yeah.
Western paradigms seem to be more behaviorally inclined.
Oriented. Yes, you're right. So the thing is that in dreams also, there will be two kinds of dreams. One, dreams which arise from our karma, runano, bandhana and samskara, which is an unpurified chitta. But we will get what we call as intuitive dreams when some kind of chitta shuddhi will happen. So chitta shuddhi will bring the intuitive dreams. A lot of students ask about intuitive nature because it's part of our Indian context and concepts. So only intuitive dreams will come only when there is chitta shuddhi. Now, second part of your question is, yes, they are behaviorally inclined. There is a problem of instrumentation in psychology. We don't know the quality of that dream as of now. We can't see that, right? We can only see what areas light up during the dream state, but we don't know the quality. So if you use 2 or 3 methods and triangulate it, you should be able to see the changes in the quality of the dreams. You will have to triangulate. Okay, so I am going to stop here. Thank you. We will close with a mantra, Karthik Sharma ji.
First of all, on the behalf of Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth and the School of Vedic Knowledge Systems, I sincerely express my gratitude to you, Shilpaji, for taking out time from your busy schedule to provide us with such a valuable information on the Bhagavad Gita and other streams of IKS as well. We have well connected many core topics like Bhava, Rasa, Bhakti, Vairagya, and especially the Jnanottara Bhakti from Vedanta across darshanas of Vedanta, Gita, Puramimamsa, Ayurveda, with the psychology. I should say that your lecturer has encouraged personally me to again reread the 12th chapter of Gita. It also throws light on the research possibility between the Indian philosophy and psychology. So thank you for this wonderful lecture. And this event has earned a huge positive response, which is very much evident from the registrations and the participation. And secondly, I would like to thank all the audience who are present here and also for their interactive session, for the interactive session that they had provided by asking the questions and all. And I also express my gratitude towards the media team, IT team of Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth for their support in organizing the event. I thank Vinayakji, the Choice of Vedic Knowledge Systems, for his guidance. Lastly, I thank you. My thanks to Kavita Verma, student coordinator of the event, and Rupal Shukla of IMN Advaita Vedanta for their support. Thank you again. Thank you, Shilpaji, again for this.
Dhanyavad.
I request Kavita to end the session.
Thank you to Acharya ji also. Yes, we will conclude this session with the prayer. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.